about how the arts really promotes the very internationalization, the partnerships, the inclusion that we all imagine and want higher education to imbibe. So I'm so pleased that the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Professor Mucha Musemwa, entrusted us as the school to lead this year. And he couldn't be with us here today, but he did send along our good friend, Professor or Dr. Emmanuel Ojo, who actually is representing the faculty today. He's the chair of the faculty's Transformation, Internationalizations and Partnerships Committee, and he will say a few words. But just to let you know that our panel members are here. Thank you very much for being here. Avril, very excited. Thank you very much, Leslie. Joma's online and will be joining us online. And Dr. Samuels is actually in transit, so we do have his message as a recorded message. But can we please just give a round of applause to all the organizers that got us here, all the speakers that agreed to speak, and really it's over to you, Dr. Ojo.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, colleagues. Those here in person and those that are actually online. If you don't mind, I will stand. I teach. So it's a pleasure to be here to welcome you to this first Africa Day celebration post-pandemic in person without a mask. Yeah, I think it's important that we emphasize that because this is the first time since 2019 that we're able to actually meet like this. The few Africa Day events we've had so far have been online. And even when we tried to have like an hybrid session last year, it was a bit of a challenge. We had one 2 years ago in Pretoria, and it was not as, still we had to put on the mask and everything. So it's nice to be here. It's nice to our panelists and to Professor Smith. I'm actually here representing not just myself as the chair of the faculty, but I'm also here representing the dean, Professor Mucha Musemwa. And I really thank you, those of you sitting here in person. Being able to be here in person is not something I take for granted at all, especially because we've actually lost quite a number of colleagues in our university. And if you permit me, I want us to just have a minute silence, especially in remembrance of our colleagues that were in the faculty. And one of them is a unique friend, Professor Becky Peters. So if you don't mind, I just want us to have a minute silence in honor of these great people. These are our colleagues. They've passed on in the pandemic, and then I will continue. And may their soul rest in peace. So this year is a unique year for the Africa Day event. It's exactly 60 years this year that the Africa Union actually was established. It's a very unique year, and I have just few things to say within the few minutes I have left, because the theme for this year is around Africa, our future. This is a continent of 55 nations, independent nations. People all over, across the world, they think Africa is one country. But we are 55 independent nations. And this year, the theme is our Africa, our future. And it's quite a unique one that we've also picked towards an inclusive higher education system as our theme for this year anniversary, for this year's celebration. I just want to say two things about that theme around towards an inclusive higher education. The first is around the need for equity in education, access, social justice. Because, in the context in which we work, reflecting about the past of this nation, Africa Day celebration is not just about Africa, it's about recognizing that we come from a place of pain. And it's going to be 30 years next year that, Apartheid ended in 94. And I just want us to think about the need for equity in higher education as a starting point. And the second is around the role of digitalization in higher education. You know, when we were having the chit chat, I overheard, she said she's doing arts and technology. And I had, the use of AI, even in arts education, in arts technology. Things like that are things we really need to pay attention to. How do we mainstream and strongly integrate digitalization in the kind of work we do in the faculty is important. And as chair of the faculty, there are 5 schools in the faculty. So there's the Wits School of Arts, and the head of school is here in the person of Professor Renee Smith, who is also hosting today's event. And I really thank you and your team. I don't take all the effort that has gone into this, I don't take it for granted at all. And also the dean does not take it for granted. Those online, please can you hear me give Professor Renee Smith and her team a round of applause for this event. The second school is the Wits School of Education, where I'm from, and I also double as the deputy head of school at the Wits School of Education. The third school is the School of Human and Community Development. The fourth is Literature, Language, and Media. And the fifth is Social Sciences. You know, as we celebrate Africa Day, I hope that we will be very intentional in terms of the conversations we have today. Not just in terms of the kind of wisdom that we'll be able to hear from the panel members, but also in terms of our role as Africans, especially in making sure that we make higher education very inclusive. Not just inclusive, but we also think about the future of our continent and ask yourself, what role am I playing in that? And I feel very strongly we really need to be very intentional in terms of the role we play. Without much ado, I'll pass the microphone back to Professor Smith. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Ojo. I mentioned at the outset that Dr. Samuels couldn't be with us here in person, that is in transit, but he did send us a recording, and I would like to just introduce the recording. Dr. Samuels is president of the International Education Association of South Africa. In addition, he's chairperson of the Southern African Nordic Center, a consortium of 60 universities across 15 countries from Southern Africa and Nordic regions. Dr. Samuels is also a member of the board of the International Virtual Exchange Consortium and represents South Africa on the network of international education associations, the peak global body for international education associations. He currently serves as Director of International Education and Partnerships at Durban University of Technology. He is a dental surgeon, medical scientist with a special interest in oral medicine and broader public health. Dr. Samuels has served as academic head of departments for dental sciences, environmental health, as well as deputy dean and acting executive dean in the Faculty of Health Sciences at DUT prior to his current role. He served a 5-year term as a board member of the Health Professions Council of South Africa and served on the Ethics Monitoring Advisory Committee of the internationally funded Reducing HIV in Adolescents Research Project. Dr. Samuels has accumulated vast experience in internationalization, having previously served as the president of IHISA from 2012 to 2014. He served 5 years on the Foreign Qualifications Committee of the South African Qualifications Authority, and in addition is board member of ICON, which is the International Center for Nonviolence, and the M.L. Sultan Charitable and Educational Trust. Please let's really to celebrate Dr. Samuels, and we thank him for his contribution.
Day for me to address you at my alma mater and to celebrate our continent on for me to address you at my alma mater and to celebrate our continent on Africa Day. My address today will be focused on how the world, through inclusive and holistic, comprehensive internationalization, can be broadly inclusive, diverse, and accessible to a generation who are our emerging leaders and who will become our future leaders, as well as why we should be striving for inclusivity, diversity, and accessibility in the current order in which we live and work. Internationalization, when all the administrative and transactional issues are dealt with, is in fact a transformational endeavor that is meant to contribute to the broader human project and address the historical, societal injustices we still face today. It is also about shaping a new generation of leaders and bringing together our current leaders. We have all witnessed a dire dearth of leadership in the world. We need leaders, not just in politics, big business, or prominent religious and human rights leaders, but leaders at all levels and spheres of society. Leaders like you. We certainly need leaders such as the great Nelson Mandela, whom I will cite today, the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Mother Teresa, the Dalai Lama, but we also need leaders like the school principal, or the faculty member who is not just a leader within the school or university system, but one who makes a difference in the community in which the institution is situated. The science teacher that inspires a generation of learners to appreciate the amazing world of science, the scientist working in a laboratory whose innovations contribute to the improved health of millions, the nursing practitioner who makes a difference not just to health of an individual, but to the health of an entire community. Internationalization of higher education is a powerful vehicle to enrich lives beyond the university setting, to unshackle minds, and to shape powerful new realities and new narratives. Bettina L. Love, in her book, We Want to Do More Than Survive, Abolitionist Teaching and the Pursuit of Educational Freedom, speaks of, and I quote, abolitionist teaching starts with freedom dreaming, dreams grounded in a critique of injustice. These dreams are dreams of collective resistance. Robin D.G. Kelly argues that a requirement for liberation, or as one refuses victim status, is an unleashing of the mind's most creative capacities, catalyzed by participation in struggles for change. Internationalization, in unshackling the mind and liberating the imagination, has the potential to color the lives of people in unimaginable ways. I have engaged in a new definition of internationalization that is both challenging and useful. This definition has only been published in the last few months. Internationalization of higher education, and I quote, is a critical and comparative process of the study of the world and its complexities, past and present, inequalities and injustices, and the possibilities for a more equitable and just future for all. Through teaching, learning, research, and engagement, internationalization fosters epistemic plurality and integrates critical, anti-racist, anti-hegemonic learning about the world from diverse global perspectives to enhance the quality and relevance of education. This is a definition that was published by Sabo Heleta and Samia Chasi in 2022. We as international educators need to play our role to shape this generation of leaders who will contribute to a better world, particularly for those that have not had the early waves of international education in their lives. It is also important for us in shaping a future generation of leaders to come together as current leaders to make a difference to the world. I would like to address the issue of inclusive and holistic internationalization. For many years, internationalization was understood to be about international academic mobility. Students who would either on a full-time basis or a semester abroad basis travel abroad for a period of time in the pursuit of knowledge and an international cultural experience. However, when we look at the statistics over the years, we realize that academic mobility is an opportunity that is reserved for a minority of our students and indeed our colleagues in the academia. The best funded mobility program in the world, the Erasmus program in Europe, at its height has achieved no more than 20% mobility of students. This figure in the biggest economy in the world, the US, drops to 7 to 9%, and on our continent, the figure is under 1%. However, our graduate attributes at most universities call for our students to have global attributes and an understanding of a globalized world, including intercultural competence. In fact, they require us to shape local citizens who understand the local context, the global context, and the bridge that connects the two. Inclusive, holistic, comprehensive internationalization is our commitment to the other 99% of students who will never get an international mobility experience. Nothing demonstrates our interconnectedness in the world more than the pandemic we have just experienced, where the local impacted on the global and the global impacted on the local. However, we are living through a global paradox where we are intensely interconnected, but also intensely divided. Educators and the leaders that emerge through education are pivotal in addressing such grand challenges. A global approach is absolutely essential in addressing challenges such as food insecurity, climate change, the burden of disease, inclusion, and conflict. We have an opportunity to come together as an international community to address these grand challenges and contribute to the advancement of society. These global challenges that are embedded across the United Nations SDGs and Africa Agenda 2063 are simultaneously intensely local and intensely global. There has never been a more important time to work together towards building a global commons of scholars, scholarship, and engagement, bringing academics, government, civil society, and business together across borders, across continents, and this is critical to humanity's ability to address and solve these challenges. I would like to, at this point, raise the issue of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a philosophy that is particular to Africa, and more specifically to South Africa. And in isiZulu, it is expressed as Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, which when translated into English roughly means we are people only because of other people. It is about espousing and highlighting a sense of community, and I would like that sense of community to be seen as a global community. In describing internationalization as a contribution to the broader human project, it is important to highlight the celebration of our interconnectedness as people that inhabit this world and the celebration of our common humanity. Internationalization at its best is about mutual care, where we serve each other in shaping our future together. At the heart of inclusive internationalization is collaboration, cooperation, coming together across borders, across differences, sometimes across comfort zones, igniting the flame of knowledge, but equally the flame of friendship and collegiality, together inspiring each other towards a better tomorrow. And so I leave you with one of my favorite African proverbs. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I therefore invite you to walk together so that we can together go further together. Thank you.
So much, and I really want to acknowledge our Film and TV department and for all the support they're providing today. So thank you so much. Thank you to Dr. Samuels. I want to also acknowledge our colleagues who are here today, as well as the students who have joined us. Thank you very much. We're now going to move into our panel discussion. And I mentioned at the outset that the focus is the creative industries or the creative economy. And I am delighted to have the following speakers join us. I'm going to read your bio and then you can come forward. Everyone is looking at me like, don't do that to me. So let me start with you, Leslie. So Leslie Williams is the CEO of Wits University's Chimologong Digital Innovation Precinct and founded Impact Hub Johannesburg in 2010, which is actually when I first heard about her, to advance social innovation in Africa. She's a practitioner of inclusive innovation. She facilitates participatory leadership, dialogues, and processes for collaborative action across multi-stakeholder innovation ecosystems. She has worked across diverse industries, and she currently serves on the boards of Innovation Foundation for Democracy, Power Grids Education Trust, and a number of others. She is sought after. She really is a sought after international public speaker, including a TEDx alumni. Her work has been recognized through various awards, including the Knight of the French National Order of Merit. She's recipient of the Inspiring 50 Award by the Kingdom of the Netherlands and has received recognition as an Obama leader by the Obama Foundation. In 2009, she was elected on a BP Antarctica expedition to design solutions for climate change, and in 2019, as part of the Mandela Centenary celebrations, she moderated a dialogue on Nelson Mandela's legacy and the future of Africa between President Barack Obama and Graça Machel at the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. I mean, I really can go on and on. Welcome, Leslie Williams. Our next panel member is a very good friend of the arts, Avril Jaffe, also someone who I've known from before my time here at Wits. Avril Jaffe is the postgraduate coordinator and former head of the Cultural Policy and Management Department at Wits School of Arts, the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. She's an economic sociologist with experience in the field of cultural policy, culture and development, and the cultural economy. Avril works in the intersection of academia and practice in fields such as culture and urban life, culture and the cultural economy, in realizing a just and sustainable development, fairness in international cultural cooperation, decent work, and the rights and status of artists and cultural professionals, as well as teaching pedagogy for postgrad studies in the cultural economy. Avril is an active member of UNESCO's panel of experts for cultural policy and governance, the Global Creative Economy Council associated with the UK's Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre, the International Cultural Relations Research Alliance, as well as International Creative Tourism Advisory Board. She is on the External International Advisory Panel for in situ place-based innovation of cultural and creative industries in non-urban areas, coordinated by the Centre for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra, Portugal, funded by the European Commission under the Horizon Europe program. There's a lot more. Please welcome Avril Jaffe. And our third panelist is joining us online, Ajoma Oche. Hi, Ajoma, welcome. We're very pleased to have you with us. Ajoma Oche is a respected thought leader and strategist in the creative economy space with over 17 years experience working on high-impact projects with renowned organizations like the British Council, the World Bank's Growth and Employment Project, the Swedish Arts Council, and various national governments in Africa and the Caribbean. As co-founder and managing partner of the Creative Economy Practice at CC Hub, Ajoma has led the organization to become a prominent player in driving value creation and technology application in Africa's creative economies through its comprehensive suite of research, advocacy, ecosystem development, investment readiness, and investor advocacy. Education programs supported by organizations including the African Development Bank, Africa Export-Import Bank, and Africa No Filter, a donor collaborative founded in May 2020 by the Ford Foundation, Bloomberg, Mellon, Luminate, Open Society Foundations, Comic Relief, and Conrad Hilton Foundation, as well as the Hewlett Foundation. With a deep understanding of creative economy development policies and practices, AJOMA has strong sector knowledge and networks globally. Her participation on the 42-member UNESCO Global Expert Panel of the 2005 Convention on the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, which this is the key UN convention on global cultural and creative industries, underscores her influence and expertise in global creative economy initiatives and policy. AJOMA sits on multiple boards as well, including Africa Technology and Creative Group, a network of technology and creative sector organizations. AJOMA, you too have a very long bio, and I can go on and on, so please let's welcome AJOMA. So instead of giving them a series of questions, I pose to them that actually they are the embodiment of what we are wanting to discuss today. We are living in a context which is increasingly divisive. We're living in a context where there's a move to the right, in a context with many big men, a context with the rise of fascism, and all of this doesn't just exist outside. It also exists in some of our institutions. But what we do know is that we talk about all of these wonderful protocols we have, all of these wonderful statutes in our country, in the region, which we are signatories to, by the way, the rest of the continent. These are things we are proud of. All of these documents, and all of them promote inclusion. And yet on the ground, we are faced with a number of rollbacks. We have so many students and staff who are struggling just to access our country, access our institutions, that it actually challenges all these wonderful frameworks that we have in place. But what we know about the creative industries is that they show us, particularly on this continent, what is possible. And that's what we wanted to showcase today. How at the heart of internationalization in our universities is partnerships and inclusion. And so I really am delighted to have colleagues with us today. They will each give a presentation for 10 minutes, and then we will open up for a discussion. Yeah? All right, so over to you, Leslie.
Thank you. Ooh. Is it working? I'm actually changing some of my content now just based on that introduction. Afternoon, everyone. When I heard earlier speakers speak about Ubuntu, and I heard you also in your framing of the discussion now, I remembered first and foremost, it is about friendship. And I think I've got the luxury to be on a panel with friends.
Yes.
And maybe I'll start with some of that story before I go into the rest of the continent, of my content. So first, I think I met AJOMA first around 2013, thereabout. And she invited me to Lagos to be part of a panel as well, and a 3-day visit to various hubs over there. And a lot of it was within the creative economy to look at where and how can we collaborate across hubs and strengthen our work as a collective. We also both serve on the Africa Tech and Creativity Group, and this was founded in 2019, where the original founder of CC Hub also saw the need to convene people around the Africa Continental Trade Agreement. And within a couple of weeks, a whole bunch of us met up in Kigali to look at where and how do we collaborate across hubs, across incubators, across relevant, interested people who are keen to make sure that this one market, trade market, takes place, and not waiting for government bodies to solve it, but for us to be active actors on the ground and start our collaboration. I think within the first 2 months, we were already 300 people across multiple WhatsApp groups. And we constantly pull each other, and we constantly actively seek ways to collaborate. And then I have no idea how we initially met, Avril, but I think it was about 2015, more or less, when the horrific xenophobic attacks took place. And after the first evening, I couldn't sleep. I was just tossing and turning, and I finally, at like 3 a.m., after like lots of prayer and just on my bathroom floor, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I put out the call on WhatsApp, not on WhatsApp, on Facebook. I said, what are we going to do? And I went and I fell asleep. I woke up in the morning and over 50 people commented and said, we need to do something. And that's how a movement called I Am Africa was born. to look at where and how are we convening as citizens, to partner with our fellow brothers and sisters, make sure everyone feels safe, make sure everybody's supported across this transition. It spread like wildfire across the country, and various people just started copying the brand, convening conversations, dialogues, forming protests, collecting food, being a quick response to making sure that also our brothers and sisters in South Africa know that what is happening is not a picture of all of our view and our perspective about where and how we should relate to each other. And Avril Sun was one of those amazing, incredible organizers that came together. So I think, there's a lot that can be said today, but I think for me it is about our human spirit and us living with each other in a way that's actually natural to us. I think a lot that's going on right now is counterintuitive, and it does not reflect our actual collective African culture. And we come from nomadic paths. Many of us, if you cut through my DNA, have multiple cultures running through my blood and my veins. And I think we need to become louder and bolder in terms of showcasing where and how we stand as a collective. So thank you for that intro. Because that is actually what it's about. Never mind all the other notes I said. I also want to speak about talent, and maybe I'll start with some of the work we do at Simologong. So our work ultimately is to create world-leading African digital entrepreneurs. That is our ultimate mission, that's our ultimate vision, that's what gets us up in the morning. And the two key ways we're doing it now is to really make sure that we're advancing smart cities solutions as well as the African digital creative industries. And our digital content hub has been going, I think, 5 years now, part of Simologong. So we do various projects around animation, gaming, virtual reality, etc. But I'll focus on two key programs. One is Digital Lab Africa, which is a Pan-Africa accelerator where we really scout the continent and look at the world's best talent in the digital creative industries. We link them to the top mentors on the continent. They go to France for 1 month for a residency where they meet buyers, publishers, anyone and everyone in the value chain to strengthen their businesses or their projects and really make sure that it takes off. We also have the Fakagezi Festival that we do in partnership with the School of Art, and it's taking place in end of September this year. What strikes me about Fakagezi Festival, which is also, like I say, a place to showcase creativity, is number one, this last year we had 1.5 million viewers online alone. We had about 28 people come from there were 28 nations represented at this past festival. This year will be even larger in our 10-year anniversary. But there is this hunger when we connect around this festival, but other festivals, to showcase African creativity and innovation, and where and how we work. And when we host residencies and we collaborate, there's always this beautiful, new, innovative, creative product or symbol that comes out of it every single year that gets a lot of attention. Part of the reason we also know this work is working, not just only our own experience, but we are seeing a high demand of players like Netflix and all of them, Netflix, Disney, Cartoon Network, that's actively seeking African creative content, digital content, original content. Now, a lot of this is good, but we also need to be careful about our IP and about our assets. I can tell stories where many of our local talent went into these amazing large studios and it ended up being sweatshop. They ended up losing their IP and they ended up not getting sufficient revenue or income for selling their IP. And number one, in order to scale our work and where and how we work, we need to stand enough together. We do not have enough animation studios or gaming studios to stand on our own. We need successful studios. We need one massive studio in one of the countries across the continent. or we're going to keep selling. You know, in the next few months, you'll see Disney is going to launch. They already procured continent from across the continent. There'll be 10 original African films on Disney Plus, and I think that's great. It brings attention to our work. But when are we going to lead within our industries? The reason why we also need to stand together is we need to mainstream what it means to have African aesthetic on our screens and at the forefront. African products. It cannot be a sideshow trinkets that we're offering the world. The quality exists, we know this. But we're going to get scale when we learn to partner well. And that's again where the importance of visas and free flow comes in. We're being invited to lots of residencies abroad, a lot of fellowship programs abroad, but we're taking our content abroad. We're not standing and working together. So as South Africans, we need to actually call BS. Sorry for the language. We actually need to call bullshit. We're standing, it's Africa Day. We have our politicians on stage with African Union, making a lot of noise, making a lot of promises. But we need to see conversion on the ground because it's having economic consequences. And just very quickly, there's a report out by the EU Commission that speaks about the difference between brain drain, brain gain, and brain waste. Now we all know like South African talent is moving abroad really fast, getting a lot of international attention abroad. And some of the consequences here is it limits our capacity to innovate, it reduces economic growth. There's a higher cost of public goods when we don't have the talent to manifest. Reduction in human capital, and there's demographic shifts. And I often ask, when we know that there's a brain drain, why are we not gaining talent from people across the continent that are knocking on the doors, that want to work here, who are highly skilled, often highly skilled than we are? There's also brain waste. Fantastic people who are often the spouses of people who they already live in South Africa. One of my team members is she's had to resign because she can't get a visa. She's lived here for 14 years. Her children are South African. Her husband is South African. She's considered the highest trainer in cybersecurity in the region, and she can't get. So we're losing her to the UK. So that's literally brain waste. Someone who wants to give you. I'll quickly finish off. Is my time up? I haven't been timing. Okay, perfect. We're also seeing in our work that there's a lot of incentives for our talents to move abroad, and not only us, our talent from the region. And if you look at some that may have been public, so when Brexit happened, France was the first to invite the talent to live there instead. Same thing when Trump was catching on his things with migration. Canada raised their hands, and Canada was like, move to Canada. And almost on a weekly or every other month, we're getting invited to conversations at Simulokong and our entrepreneurs, where countries are actively inviting and giving us incentives to move them. So it includes UK, it includes moving headquarters to the UK, to Canada, Estonia visas. So people are flashing visas at us because they understand the value of having high quality talent. We need to get to that place as well as South Africa. We're going to fall short very fast if we're not inviting regional talent. And then just finally, I've been sitting with this book, and I look at it. Barry Alaska actually gave it to me. He passed away last week, the founder of Simulokong. It's called The Flat White Economy, and speaks about how London's digital economy and digital cluster was transformed, and other cities of the future. And again, they keep emphasizing, there's a whole chapter dedicated to the importance of immigration when building digital innovation clusters. And they also speak about, which I think many of us have seen, there's a disproportionate amount of people in Silicon Valley, a disproportionate amount of Indians and Chinese that are driving innovation and entrepreneurship. There is something that happens to you mentally, and for those of us who have lived abroad or moved country, where your brain, I think about the refining a diamond from coal, you become refined in that process and that struggle of moving abroad. Your thinking is shaped. So you have that creativity and that creative muscle that gets built in that transaction. And when people come to our country, they bring that. But when we move abroad as well, that's what we take abroad. And this is why South African talent is in high demand. So my final 2 points, the one is, yes, South Africa is exceptional, but that's often our trap because we think we're so special, we become arrogant. But we're not the only ones that are exceptional. And increasingly, the market's looking to Ghana. Ghana is alive and vibrant. Things happening in Nigeria, and Kenya, Rwanda. We're not the only ones that are exceptional. And we need all of our exceptionalism to thrive together on the continent. And I'll read this final small, there's so much to read, I could read from this book, I'll just read this line. All immigrants are artists. It is as, all immigrants are artists is a fascinating assertion by the Haitian-American author Edwidge Dandy Cap. Perhaps it overstates the case, but it certainly draws our attention to the powerful link between migration and artistry.
Thank you, Leslie. Ajoma. We are ready. We are ready for you, Ajoma.
Oh, sure. Thank you very much to Renee and to the faculty for inviting me. It's always a delight to be on panels and conversations with Leslie and Avril. I was really hoping I wouldn't be last because invariably they'll say what I want to say, which Leslie has already done. So sorry, Avril, if I say some of what you want to say. So the perspectives that I want to share today are perspectives from working across policy and practice in the digital economy and in the creative economy across Africa for the last 17, 18 odd years. And my point of departure for this intervention was really reflecting on what would the ultimate state of affairs look like for the creative economy if we had optimum African partnerships for innovation, for inclusive growth, and for sustainability, as the topic of this panel suggests. And I titled my intervention, Reimagining the Creative Economy in Africa, Ownership, Innovation, and Sustainable Growth. I've got maybe 6 points to make in relation to the topic. My 6 points, to my mind at least, are practical things that need to happen beyond protocols and conventions, beyond talk to tangible action. The first of those points is around African voice and storytelling ownership. If we're going to move to a point where we have a reimagined creative economy, where we're partnering and where there's inclusive growth and sustainability, we have to, on one hand, amplify African voices, but on the other hand, take control of African storytelling. In this ultimate state that I've reimagined, we're not merely the subject of the stories or the consumers of the stories. We're the ones that craft, curate, and disseminate the stories. I'm convinced that this ownership will allow us to shape narratives about ourselves across Africa. It'll allow us to tackle stereotypes. It'll allow us to give a more accurate, but also more diverse and nuanced narrative of Africa, a narrative of Africa that's not based on a single story. It will enable us to give a more empowering depiction of African experiences. When I envision this African ownership of storytelling, I'm envisioning a variety of languages, a variety of cultures, a variety of histories, aspirations, challenges, and triumphs across the continent. My second point is about ownership of production and distribution platforms. And a key aspect of this creative economy that I envision is African ownership of the platforms through which our stories are shared. Whether we're talking about film studios or publishing houses or streaming devices or streaming services or social media networks, it is not enough for us to be creators, performers, and consumers. We must also own and control the means of production, the means of distribution, and monetization. We must ensure that the creative process is fair. We must ensure that the work is valued properly. and that the profits are reinvested in our own communities. My third point relates to intellectual property, which Leslie was talking about there. We need to channel significant portions of our own capital, African capital, into generating and protecting intellectual property. This includes copyrighting our music, patenting our innovation, trademarking our designs, protecting our traditional cultural expressions, enabling intra-Africa collaboration that they're talking about there. On one hand, this ensures that we benefit from the fruits of our creativity, and that's where in this constant state of exchange on the continent. But on the other hand, it will also discourage and undermine cultural appropriation and exploitation because we own our intellectual property and we determine how it's used. My fourth point is about democratization of capital. In this ultimate creative economy that I've envisioned, we would not just be the labor. We would also own the land in a metaphorical sense sometimes, and the capital. This means having access to the necessary resources and infrastructure, whether we're talking about sound stages or studios, as Leslie was talking about there, or art supplies, fashion workshops, film equipment, technology gadgets, creative spaces. In this re-envisioned world where we have democratized capital, you would have access to this, whether you're in Lagos or Luanda or in Marrakesh or Mombasa. My fifth point is about financial ownership. We would also own the financial resources, the investment funds, the loans, the grants, the royalties that we need to fund creative projects, to support creative entrepreneurs, to sustain creative careers. We would not have to rely solely or majorly on foreign investment or aid. Although we would welcome them, we would welcome these partnerships on our own terms. My final point is this idea of decolonizing the creative economy. And in this decolonized creative economy, we're reclaiming our creative power. We're building a system that respects our rights, recognizes our value, and it redistributes resources more equitably. It's about shifting, as I was saying before, from being mere consumers and workers in the global creative economy to being owners, leaders, and change agents. This vision that I've got of this ultimate creative economy for Africa is one where the creative economy is not only prosperous and innovative, but one that is inclusive, is just, and is dignifying. It's an economy that creates wealth without creating inequality or worsening inequality. It's an economy that promotes creativity without exploiting creators. It's one that celebrates our African identity without limiting our global reach. This ultimate state, I'm convinced, is one that will reflect our dreams, respect our rights, and still realize our potential. That's all from me. Thanks again for having me. I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you. Lights, please, our final panelist, Avril.
Hi, thanks so much. So yeah, Ojoma was right. Once she's spoken and Leslie has spoken, what else is there to say? So what I want to do is, I think it will bring it all together, in fact, because as Leslie said, you know, it says something about how long I've been around, that she knows me by my son, who is remarkable and wonderful, but that does say something about how old I am. And Ojoma and I are on the same UNESCO expert facility. We both worked in Jamaica. We are on the same WhatsApp group, and we support each other. It's a big WhatsApp group of all African experts. And we, you know, it became really vital during COVID how we were able to say, well, how are you dealing with access to your theaters? And somebody would say, well, we've got protocols, we'll give them to you, you know, and so on. Do you want me to stand that
yes,
side?
so that they can see you.
Oh, sorry. Can I take this with me? Is it mobile enough? Good. All right, so what I want to talk about is, I want to say three things. Ojoma said 6, I'm saying 3. So firstly, it went further. Where did it go? The creative economy in Africa is vibrant.
Yes.
I'm not even going to tell you how vibrant it is. We all know that. But we have to be wary of the hype. What do you mean by the hype? There is so much said around, oh, I'm going the wrong way. It's funny to use, no, it's fine. There's a lot of hype that talks about massive media attention, untapped potential, the sleeping giant of Africa. And often it's always in the form of money, jobs, employment. That is not the creative economy Ujoma was talking about. It's not the creative economy Leslie was talking about. It's certainly not the creative economy we are teaching and hearing about from our students and from the sector that we are deeply involved in. So there are false assumptions that the CCIs, the culture and creative industries, will lift the continent out of poverty and unemployment. It's a dangerous comment to be making. And that enthusiasm is often about potential monetization and market creation of the CCIs. We understand there's developmental potential, but that potential is exactly about the things that Ujoma was talking about. It's about the identity of Africans, about storytelling from Africa by Africans on African terms. And this is despite the claim, I mean, UNESCO, UNCTAD, but when you look at the figures, our global share of creative industries is less than 1% of the world's creative industries, right? So there are many issues that we have not yet resolved. And I wanted to put this map up. We all know the map of Africa, but right, just focus on, we have 5 regions. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. So, you know, we have to really think about how to change mindsets, how to change narratives. My fellow panelists have all said, and speakers have said that before. We have this idea, and the ILO will come and say, we must formalize the informal economy. It's the only way forward. But you ask people who are in the informal economy, do you want to be formalized? No. Why are we not listening? We are arrogant in the way that we adopt things that are coming from another world view. The perspective of the global north is not always relevant to us. And the whole idea of decolonizing curriculum extends to decolonizing our views on informality, our views on work, our views on intellectual property, our views on trade, right? If we think about those things in the Western perspectives that we have been inherited from this institution itself, the way we've all been taught in the past, we will undermine the very creativity we want to advance. And so we need to think about the informal. It's not chaotic and disorganized. It's actually a multifaceted, complex, local indigenous economy in its own right, for which it needs policy. Now, as a policy person, I look at the problems and I always want to say, what do we do about it? Right? I'm not happy enough to say, how do we understand it? Yes, we need to understand it, but what are some of the solutions? And I'm getting exercise here. We need to revisit public policy that would be relevant, for example, to the informal cultural creative economy that is the most dominant way in which all our actors work. You ask any freelancer, any contractor, any filmmaker, any musician, how they're working, it's typically informally based. You even ask a musician to have a contract, they say, I don't have time to go to a jetline to print out the contract and sign it. I'm happy, I trust you. You say I must be there at 3, I'll be there at 3, right? So we can think of public policy, and I've written a paper with colleagues about this, that is thinking about intermediaries that can be the buffer between the informal, the people who don't want to be in the radar of government, and often the reasons for informality are not only economic, they are often political. People do not trust what the government will do with your money. You know, so they don't want to be paying taxes. And we have to recognize it, from Egypt all the way down to South Africa. And, you know, we can think about how can financial systems adjust their systems to meet needs of freelancers and self-employed. How can we think about social protection and labor standards that is available to people who are informal, that don't require them to suddenly become formal workers. It's a misnomer to think that formalization is the answer to our creative economy. And then I want to come, I've went too far. There's much to celebrate, okay? And you know, much to celebrate. CC Hub, Chimolokong, Music in Africa Foundation, Africa No Filter, the HEVA Fund in East Africa, the Culture Funding Watch in North Africa. These are all remarkable institutions. But where's the money coming from? From the global north. And who's driving the agenda? The global north. And so it goes back to what both Leslie was saying and Ujoma. The agency has to reside with us. So we need to think about how unequal power relations in our society, often colonialism is so present in everything we do, and how the funding narratives that are coming from another part of the globe are driving the priorities. Whose priority is it when there's a funding call for funding that has to achieve X? The agenda is coming from somewhere else. When are we going to set the agenda and have the funding to do the work that we know we need to be doing? So looking at some of the, I've done some research with colleagues around EU funding in particular, because that's a dominant form of funding that's available to African creative sector. And, you know, through all those organizations, HEVOS, Plins Cloud, Goethe Institute, CEDA, you named them, British Council I've had to put outside because of Brexit. Okay, so, you know, those funding mechanisms are circumscribed by a focus on sub-Saharan Africa. What does anybody on this continent want? They adopt the values and principles of Pan-Africanism. But EU funding can't see that. It can only fund sub-Saharan Africa. Why? Because North Africa is part of the MENA region. So by definition, what is EU saying to African Union? We don't respect you. We're not listening. That's the bottom line. And then they come with these ideas, intercultural dialogue, creative industries, cultural diversity. Whose ideas are they? I remember when we first started talking about cultural diversity in this country, everybody says, why are you talking about apartheid? We had that cultural diversity, respecting everybody, everybody's living their own communities, nobody must interact. We don't want that kind of cultural diversity, right? So the response initially to the UNESCO 2005 sort of convention for the promotion and protection of the diversity of cultural expressions was negative in our country. So if you look at the history of that, and the whole idea of the role of culture in development, or even culture in its role in sustainable development, has been twisted into an entrepreneurial understanding of saying it's about the creative economy and jobs and employment. And we've lost the developmental aspect that is so vital to what culture and identity and heritage and storytelling can do for our continent. And the other problem with EU funding and all other funding that comes from other places is there's an unfairness built into it by definition. Right, and what is that unfairness? Firstly, blind spots. People do not even know. They are saying things as if they are the custodians of knowledge of the African creative economy, but yet they're sitting somewhere else. There's no deep respect for those of us who have been working on this for 25, 30 years, because we can't possibly know what they know, because they're from the global north. Right, those blind spots are frustrating in the extreme. There's geographic boundaries, as I said. The elitism that happens because, obviously, through COVID, those interactions, international cultural cooperation happen more and more. But who can it happen with? People who have access to the internet. People who can speak English. People in the urban areas. Where are the voices of the communities that are further afield? Where are the voices of people who are not the elites of the society? It's the same thing happens in our institution. Who can go to an international conference? Someone who's got a spouse who's making some money, because guess what? There's no money in the university to send you to an international conference. But guess what? Only an international journal is seen as valid. How does that work? Right? It's part of the same blind spots that we have to address for ourselves. Trust questions. You know, recently the African, Caribbean, Pacific community decided to decentralize funding and allow a grouping in East Africa, North Africa, Southern Africa, West Africa, not North Africa, Southern Africa, West Africa, and Central Africa to have a local agency running the fund. One of the funds was run by the HEVA Fund. The HEVA Fund is the most remarkable internationally recognized institution. They've just been able to go from a 6 million fund, equity fund for the creative sector in East Africa to a $10 million. $10 million for the creative sector in East Africa. They got the contract to disperse the funds, as did Music in Africa Foundation for Southern Africa. But everybody was told you have to partner with one of the EU National Institutes of Culture, British Council, Goethe Institute, French Institute, all those ones. Why? Don't they trust them? Internationally recognized, with their own system of how to disperse money, understanding the local context, but yet using the British Council system, which is not understanding the local context. There's something deeply problematic about this, that we see happening, we allow it to happen, we don't speak up. I'm speaking up because I'm so old that it doesn't matter to my career anymore to speak up. And there's some benefit in that. My career is not dependent on people liking what I have to say or the message, right? And I think it's so important to be able to speak up, because if we don't, who will? Okay, so just some other points I wanted to. So just finally, you know, one of the things that we think is so important is to develop something that I call African public space. What does that mean? Public space is a place where everybody can access, engage in, participate in, contribute to, create, consume creative and cultural goods, services, entertainment, gaming, digital, etc. That's our job, is to create African public space. That's our job. We cannot do it in the context of linguistic and geographic silos. We cannot do it if we don't enable encounters for interaction, peer learning, networking on the continent. A lot of these, part of the jobs that I do are evaluating these projects. Often, it's about bringing people from Africa to a meeting in Europe. And people in Africa saying, why can't we meet on the continent? It's more beneficial because then more people can be there. We can invite our friends and our colleagues, and we get to meet each other and see each other and understand each other. And building agency, I think Ujoma said that quite a few times, as a key priority amongst local actors, not only in urban areas, but in peri-urban areas, in the rural areas. And that's critical. So the third point, I think, my third point, is the higher education institutions on the continent have the most important role to play. They, for me, are a key intermediary in the sector. I talked about the importance of intermediaries. The higher education sector has an important role to play in supporting a vibrant, robust creative economy. Are we doing enough? We have to ask ourselves. And we have to really question what else we could be doing. So, for example, one of the things we did is develop something called the African Sustainable Hub for Creative Economies. We partnered with Chimologong Precinct. We partnered with SASFED because our focus was on film and media and digital media. We partnered with the University of Lagos. Their focus was on performing arts and acting for theatre and for film. And we partnered with the University of Nairobi. Their focus was on fashion. And it was a really important way to, A, have dialogue with our community, do some research. We had some funds and grants that we could give to people to think about some seed capital to catalyze ideas. And it was developed by King's College London with money from the UK. This is what we did. I've mentioned that. And the thing about that is that at the end of the day, how do we make sure that we benefit from that partnership? How do we ensure that that partnership we're not just the feeding ground of research? We used to be the place you come and take resources out the ground. We are now the place where people come and take your ideas and research us. We are we are the research input for very career-minded people from the global north. And until we do our own research and write up our own stories and publish them in our own journals, it won't be our knowledge. Where knowledge is produced, where it's published, is so important to who owns it and how you understand it. So one of the things that I think is also becoming quite interesting is a number of projects that are helping to stimulate PhD alumni on cultural management. This is a big project run by Dodd, which is a German academic exchange fund that has funded 15 West African academics to have a PhD. And I was lucky enough to be asked to be the key facilitator of a training program in Ghana. What's important about this is that these people, these 15 West Africans, become our collaborators. But we've got to nurture it. They must become our examiners, our co-supervisors, our guest lecturers, right? Because they've all got a PhD in the topics, and they're working in universities where there's no postgrad program on cultural management, cultural policy, arts management, or whatever. They are in departments that are about literature and about fine arts maybe, and about performing arts maybe. But we remain the only program, CPM, the only program on the continent that is at a postgrad level teaching this field, and we need to develop these partnerships with people from the rest of the continent and not bring in visitors only from the UK or Europe. It's so important that we have the collaborations like with your Brazilian counterpart, that it's a South-South dialogue. It's Africa Day, so I'm focusing on Africa, but for me it's a South-South dialogue. So one of the things we're doing is looking to partner with ARUA. ARUA is the African Research Universities Alliance. There are 16 universities as part of it. There are almost all the ones from South Africa, Wits, UCT, Rose, Stellenbosch, Pretoria, the usual suspects, I would call them, are there. And then 2 from Nigeria, Ibadan and Lagos, and 1 each from Ethiopia, Mauritius, Tanzania, etc., etc. And we've said to them, they mainly have centers of excellence on what we call science. We're not seen as science. We're just not in the arts. So they've got things on waste management and climate change and all those sorts of things. And we felt it was really important to develop a cluster on creative economies, cultures, innovation, and sustainability. And so the application is currently being considered. We've had a lot of support from the Dean. Thank you very much. Really important to have that support. It's now going to the principals and the Vice Chancellor. I'm hoping that we can get a message to them so they know when they're getting it on the 2nd of June, they'll look at it favorably. And it will be led by, because we don't have money, so this becomes a problem again, because there's no funding for us, we have to go into partnership with the Guild, which is a big university research group from Europe. And then the question is, well, who's leading this now? Again, it's been led by King's College London with our colleague from SACO, Jen Snowball from Rhodes University. We've already got 2 centers of excellence at Wits, so you apparently can't have more than 2. So Rhodes would be the lead for that. But still the question is that we should have our own center of excellence on creative economies amongst all of us African universities, because then you have agency exactly where it ought to be. So concluding thoughts, our commitment at Wits is to decolonizing the curriculum, but in doing that, it's about everything to do with our understanding of the world in which we find ourselves. And we have to develop new narratives. We can't adopt these global north narratives. They don't serve us. They don't help explain what we are doing. And we really have to go away from the hype and the dominance of those global north discourses and reestablish the role of culture, and in culture I include the arts, in the heart of our economy. So the culture is seen as an ecology. It's an ecosystem in which the university plays a major part. And it's an ecosystem that's essential to the human condition. And I think it's been said by everybody today. Not as a set of commercial sectors of the creative industries. That is not the economy that we are looking at and that we want to advance in our teaching practice, in our research, and so on. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. You can also join here. Come, if you can all just sit on this side, and maybe we can bring Ajoma back up. We now get to invite you to be part of the discussion. 3 very robust presentations. There was also the presentation from the president of AISA, Dr. Samuels, and then of course Dr. Ojo as well. So let's open up for some questions. Chatty, I should say, I didn't say this at the beginning, especially for the people online, that I'm the head of school. And Chachi's the head of department for cultural policy and management, so I knew you would have a question. Go ahead, Chachi.
Thank you, Renee, and good afternoon to colleagues, and thank you so much to our four esteemed panelists. Very inspiring and encouraging insights you shared with us this afternoon. And one of the things which is inspiring about what you shared is that I think all of you in the process of replicating yourselves and your activism in accentuating the voice of Africa in Africa. And I see this happening through the curriculum and through the training of our students, some of whom are amongst us in this room. So really celebrating that which is happening, and I'm hoping that in future we are going to have more Avrils, more Leslies, more Ujomas, more Samuels, really planting this new narrative. But in this exciting moment, in my reflection and listening to the presentation, there's something which sort of took me back to where I felt that sometimes our fate as the creative economy is determined elsewhere, which, and by elsewhere I mean our fate is determined in political agreements, in economic agreements, which then tend to disempower or sort of deflate the potential which we have as a creative economy to drive the African agenda. So what I want to hear maybe in an inspiration where the dejection of feeling that we are powerless. Avril, in one of your last comments, you said, "We has the money," and they have the money. And for me, I feel that whilst we get rejuvenated and get excited, but the economic decisions are made elsewhere, political decisions are made elsewhere, and which leave us in the very same space where we are operating. So how do we emerge out of, how do we go beyond and allow ourselves, our voices to transcend the economic and political decisions? Thank you.
Absolutely, and how do we live the agency that Ajoma was inviting us to? So can we get some feedback while we get another round of, oh, you will, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Chatty, always spot on. You know, I mean, I think that the challenge I'm putting out here, and it's nice to have Professor Ojo sitting right next to me, is that our university has to come to the party with money. Because if we don't resource it ourselves, we are always at the beck and call of somebody else's funding. And to allow us at least to be equal partners, even if it's not enough money to run the whole program, but to somehow allow us to be equal partners. So when we got the funding for the African Sustainable Hub for Creative Economies, there was no local money, right? We didn't put any money of our own in. And yet, the project was vital for our teaching, our learning, our research. And then the project's over, and then that's done, right? But it should be now embedded in our program generally. We should continue with that hub. We should have funding to continue to do those creative imagination weeks, to talk to the sector, to have research that is co-produced and co-created with the sector. It's so important to do that, and the only way to do that, when we've had funding from local agencies like the National Arts Council or Business and Arts South Africa or SAMRO Foundation or one of those that ask us to work with them on a project, the impact on our students is phenomenal because they feel that they're doing something deeply meaningful because it's going directly into work that is then used in the sector. And the only way to do that is with local funding. And so whether it's via the sector, whether it's via our government, whether it's via our institution, we need to have more money flowing. And that's why Africa No Filter is quite interesting, because they're convening a lot of funds from other parts of the world, but they are translating it into an African product that people can then apply for. The same with Hiva Fund. They've gone into partnership with MasterCard, but the fund is run by Africans in East Africa on their terms. The MasterCard Foundation doesn't put any terms on them of how to disperse, who to disperse to, what criteria to use. And that's because people like George Kachara and his colleagues have become so powerful. And it is about many things: agency, confidence, willingness to speak out against abuse, against exploitation, against what you see as unfairness. You know, so I participate in many arenas with UNIC, the EU National Institute of Culture, or the International Relations Research Alliance just 2 days ago, and they kept saying it will come out in the summer, and I said, hey, whose summer? You know, we don't live in your summer. That's our autumn. You know, let's just use the month, and let's equalize the conversation. Just because I'm the only person from the global south doesn't mean that the discussion even must be only about global north understandings. And there's a real arrogance, and we don't have the same arrogance, and we ought to.
Thanks so much. Ojoma, your hand was up. Did you want to respond? Please go ahead.
Yes, I did want to respond. Everything that Avril has said, but also additionally to say, look, we cannot divorce what happens in the creative industries from what happens in the macro environment. We are a function of the politics of the places where we live. We're a function of the governance in the places where we live. And I think it was Plato that said, if you refuse to participate in politics, then you will be governed by your inferiors. And I feel like in many of our countries, that's where we are. We think we're too pure, we're too creative, we're somehow too good to participate in politics. Whether we're artists or whether we're intermediaries or whether we're academics working in this area, until we participate in politics and governance, we're not going to be in a position to make decisions about what happens in our societies and what happens in our sectors on a more granular level. So that's the only thing I'd add to what Avril has said. We must participate in those structures and systems that we have where those decisions are made. Otherwise, we'll get what we get, which is what we have now.
Excellent. Thank you. Did you want to?
Thank you. I think from my perspective, what you consume is a form of activism. And I think we need to be very, very conscious of that. I think it was I think it was a UNESCO report that I read earlier this year that said multi-choice invests something like 40% into local content, 40% of their revenue. Now it is a bit of a pinch for me because like Netflix, can start at 99 Rand a month, but we need to build the local platform that Ojoma is speaking about locally. Be it multi-choice or another player. For now, I think part of the fastest bet for me is multi-choice. I'm actively investing monthly in my subscription because I want them to buy more local content and I want them to be strong. When I speak to a lot of animators, every time, like, what inspired you growing up? They're like Dragon Ball Z. A lot of them Dragon Ball Z, that's what they watch. I want the next generation to say something that we produce locally. Now, we are trying to, we're busy working, developing an animation series at Simulokong, according to the specs that SABC needs. Again, if these things become as popular as Dragon Ball Z, then local advertisers are incentivized to spend and buy advertising space during that high quality animation series we're going to create. So for me, that is where the economics comes in. Economics, I think from a personal level, our form of activism, but we also then create the business case for companies then to invest. So I think I'll leave that there for now.
Thanks so much.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. You know, what is interesting about the conversation we're having is that everything centers around money. It's about commerce. It's about the economy. And the conversations we've had so far is about ourselves as Africans. How much respect do we have for ourselves? as a starting point. For me, it's not so much, the starting conversation should not just be about the money. It's about us as Africans looking inward across the 55 countries and asking ourselves, how easy is it for me to move to Nairobi to work, move to Johannesburg to work, decide to go to Mombasa or go to Cairo, actually decide to go in Tunis? If you look at the visa regime on the continent already, for me, it's a problem. You see, a colleague was talking to me from Liberia yesterday, and he's doing work across West Africa, very fantastic, phenomenal work. But for him to fly to Liberia was an effort. About a month ago, I was in Accra, Ghana. For me to fly into Accra, Ghana, I literally had to go through almost 14 hours. So that is a starting point. And I totally agree with you that it's a mixture of politics, mixture of our own agency, and also the fact that we have is a multimodal point that we are dealing with, and the data sets are quite complex. The second thing I want to really talk about is around relationships. Ubuntu is around relationships. The kind of conversation we're having now is not conversation that can happen if we are not connecting what we do in academia with what is happening with the non-governmental organizations, with what is happening even in government, in what is happening with the private sector. So it's the need for what I call a quadruple helix model, in which we build an ecosystem of relationships, where the academia is speaking to the private sector, speaking to the government, speaking to the non-governmental organizations, and we see ourselves as an ecosystem of support, where we have a common interest we're actually drawing on. The policies are already there. The AU Agenda 2063 is phenomenal. We have a National Development Plan in South Africa 2030, solid. When the white paper of the immigration law, immigration document was actually brought up in 2018, I was the expert that actually sat with the Department of Home Affairs, with the Minister of the Department of Home Affairs, to look at some of the issues. How do we attract skills into South Africa? We have all those policies there. What we need to do is to put action into talk.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think we started with that in the beginning, saying that there is so much that is happening, that's there, that exists. We talk left, we act right.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Nosi Ponzizi. I just want to make a note. Today, I have my teachers here, so I'm going to be shy speaking all out, but I will try to speak. I want to try to answer one question that was raised about our fate being determined somewhere. I want to say to that, from a perspective of an artist, I would say that we would have to kind of redefine what power is, you see, and redefine it for ourselves. For instance, we may have to use skills to navigate, to use, money is the one that gives us access to the things that we want to reach, but we may also use skills to navigate and to give us access to the places that we want to reach. So I wanted to say that. And also, I wanted to say something on almost behalf of the artist. I would say that I am that talent that is ignored in this country, you see. So it doesn't come as a surprise that many artists end up taking a decision to go overseas, because that's where the green pastures are. Not many people have it in them to resist all the money, because there are opportunities and people offering you opportunities that will give you some kind of income for the longest time, you see, at the expense of selling out quality resources, you see. So that happens. And it isn't in anyone's ability to actually resist that. Actually, it's a disadvantage because you struggle for a very long time. I will make an example. Just today, I made like a composition. My first question was, okay, with this composition, how do I protect it? And if I do perform it in public, then how do I make sure that this work is not stolen? You see, so we have things like that in terms of ownership and trying to protect the things that you produce as an artist. And I will say that we are struggling, you see. So it's not easy to say no to the outside world, you see. So it's not always an easy thing to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Because we are over time, I'm going to take, are there any other questions? Any other comments anyone wants to make? If not, if you can maybe use that also as an opportunity to round up.
I just want to say thank you to everyone here and to my colleagues here as well as Professor Smith. I'm hoping that we'll have this kind of deliberations going on more of these, because we really need this kind of conversations to not just open up some of the issues, but also to find solutions. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I think it's lovely and really important that we have these conversations. We should do it more regularly, not just in Africa Month, but you know, because we need to do it with our colleagues on the rest of the continent.
Yes.
So I would like us to say next year we have this conversation with people from other universities on the continent who on a topic that is chosen, where we hear voices that we don't normally hear. Because I think, you know, even though we're not always talking to one another, it's even more important that we are hearing what our colleagues on the rest of the continent are saying. As Leslie was saying and as others were saying, sometimes we essentialize the South African problems. And the minute you land up traveling to Ghana, to Nigeria, to Zambia, whatever, you realize that there is so much creativity, so much vibrancy going on. Ujoma's just been part of a study, by the way, around the Creative Vibrancy Index, which showed that Joburg came out top with the enabling environment. And you would think that would translate into actual. But actually, Lagos came out top on the creative economy, and Cairo came out top as the most vibrant city. So the three were very different. And I think hearing that, I was hoping she would tell us more about it today, but it's such a fascinating way to understand what's going on in other countries. A lot of them do not have cultural policies. Although 2/3 of African countries have ratified the convention, nobody's really translated the cultural policy into looking at strategies for the creative economy, in however that's defined in that country. So we don't really have a very clear strategy around policy on the continent. Despite the AU Agenda 2063, it still has to be translated down into national policy. And then it has to be translated down into local government policy. Because it's at the local level that we experience culture and we intersect with it, we participate in it. So I'm just very happy that we've had this start of the conversation and to be with all the colleagues here. Thank you.
Great.
I'm so caught up in what you're saying, I actually forgot what I was going to say. I think a few things from my end. The one is, I mean, to your point earlier on, Avril, you were speaking about writing our own content. We need to write, guys. Produce, share your thoughts, put that research paper out, put that blog or vlog or whatever's trending out right now. Take up space as the African voice. We need to make it louder, we need to make it clearer, and we need to keep it relevant, but relevant for us. We are audience. And people can be second comers, but put out stuff for yourself that reflects and represents you. I think we need to get a habit. I need to go hide away this weekend and work on my anticipation. Yes. And then, to Joma's point also earlier around platform development, I'm very keen and working on that. Now, a lot of this sometimes feels so far off, but what you can literally do tomorrow morning is take a taxi or car or walk down to the Ethiopian market downtown Joburg. Go to that mall, full of Ethiopians, every floor, TV, content, food, everything and anything. Maybe go later on to next week to the Mozambican restaurant. Stimulate your curiosity. While we're sorting out the long-term goal of visas, we could be curious locally, connect with our regional friends and colleagues right here in Joburg. We're vibrant not just because of our own doing, but Joburg's a migrant community. Let's embrace that. We cannot speak boldly about Africa Day on platforms when we only come alive, like I said, on Africa Day or when we're traveling to other African countries. We can experience so much of our continent 10 minutes from here. So that is my challenge to all of you. Make an agenda and just challenge yourself. Say maybe 3 meals per month from a different...
Great. Thank you so much. Can we give all of our panelists a round of applause? Thank you so much. I'm sorry that Ojoma is now, she's not with us, but just to thank her very much, to thank everyone who's joining us live. Thank you so much for being there. Thank you all of you for coming through today. This is a really important conversation. Of course, it would be, unlike me not to promote the school. Especially the Cultural Policy and Management Department, which is really growing. Thank you very much. I think it's really important work, and I think a lot of that came through today. It speaks to the intersection with governments, with policy, with being the change. I really like the provocation that actually we have to be very clear, and it must be with intent, where we are paying for things, where we are buying things, who we are supporting. It really is about setting our own agenda, so thank you very much for that. But I do have a number of people to thank. When we started, I spoke about the film and TV department, and I really want to thank them because this was a hybrid session, and we had, we really thought, well, actually, if we don't get our tech right, today will be a bit of a disaster. So I want to thank the film and TV department and the colleagues who were here, as well as you, Teddy, who's still with us. Thank you very much. In particular, I want to thank Happiness, who is always happy. Thank you very much, Happiness. Sponelo, Tubilev, Vuyiswa, Mureleba, Tobeka. I never like to call out names because I always feel I'm going to forget someone. Please, everybody who helped us with tech today, thank you very, very much. I also want to thank, as I stated, our panelists, including our keynote, who actually was in transit, and that's why he couldn't be with us, Obidi and the marketing team, who really pulled things together last minute, Mfundo, our music admin, Cabello, Donato, thank you very much for all you've been doing for the ushers. Really, thank you very much to Dr. Andile Kumalo, who actually pulled together the entire program.
You need
thank
to stand.
You, Andile. We have a number of events, so please join us again. If you are joining online, same link. We have our session 2 this afternoon. Later this afternoon, we have events planned for tomorrow, for Sunday as well as for Monday. You are all welcome to join us. Thank you so much for being with us. You're an awesome audience. Thank you to the speakers. You inspire me, all of you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, there are refreshments outside. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Oh, please, thank you for representing me. Okay. Can we be part of the picture? And lovely to meet you.
Can retire. Yeah, second.
I was just asking my face. When you take a photo, please be part of the please be part of the photo.
Thank you for having me, and good evening to everyone. All protocol observed. When I wrote, it was a series of developments, but I particularly suffered from the trauma of losing my father at a very young age. Was born at a time when Johannesburg was almost up in flames, was in flames. A state of emergency. My father was incarcerated in prison, in detention without trial for extended periods during 1982 to 1986. And he actually, funny enough, he also attended school here because he was expelled at Fort Hare for organizing protests against the systems, or the Bantustan systems there. And never, and growing up without knowing my father, and him also occupying the same space that I would also occupy in later years, such as him working here, right here in Joyson at Chilo Thompson and Hasten, when it was still at Joyson Place, and him having to go on the bus, the metro bus system, when it was just being desegregated, and him suffering injuries from that. And me also taking the same buses, and me going to school at the National School of Arts, roamed the same space and was in the same environment that he was in, but under a different circumstance, under a free and fair South Africa, which he did not enjoy. And from that position, I also grew up with the testimonies of the TRC, and finding out the full story and circumstances around his death, and him investigating the Vlak Plaas and how it was uncovered, and also where he died was all within the space that we know as Johannesburg. And for me, Johannesburg has come to is both the place of opportunity and where I first experienced my trauma as a child, and also where I experienced my education, and this is and also that's where I also my musical education, and from that point I also developed this music around what the city means to me, and how I would write music around the city, and the people that have also taught me the music come from the city, but were not originally from the city. So the various strands of influence, and various pieces talk to the sights, the sounds, and the smells, particularly one entitled Chicken Dust, which I grew up tasting and eating for a very long time, and also borrows also from the tradition, from the classic jazz tradition of standard writing, which has a chordal harmonic opening and a vamp bridge, and closing off with the chordal harmonic sequence at the end. And those were the influences of jazz, but also from my experience as a Johannesburger, and trying to take the audience on that ride. So very, very much that, and then incorporating into a much more broader work that also talks about the social injustice that we still experience, not just the social injustice, but the economic injustice that we experience as victims of apartheid. And that's primarily what inspired this piece, and speaking truth to it by having contributors such as Lesego Rampolo Gang and Jonela Mnana and the Brother Muzon.
Thank you so much, Mandla. And as I said, we'll end this discussion with some music, and of course we have the extraordinary opportunity tomorrow evening to hear the work. So you've begun to refer to your longtime collaborator, and Jonela Mnana, of course, is a jazz scholar and a recording singer and a jazz pianist who is an alumnus of our school, and has walked a journey with you in the realization of this piece. So Jonela, I thought I'd go to you next, and it would be wonderful to hear what insights you'd like to share in terms of this musical work, but also the themes that the work is addressing.
I'm happy to have the opportunity to talk to you about this work. And yes, I have met Mandla way before, I think in 2000 and maybe 3.
Wow.
Yeah, 2003.
20 years ago.
Yeah, he was still at the NSA. And I remember because when we had when I just started studying music here, and one of the courses I think was drama, and so they wanted me to leave the degree, I mean the drama course, because because it was on the 9th floor, and they were like, you're gonna, there's glass there. They don't want to be responsible for that stuff. So, but eventually Malcolm Payne a musical here, and I auditioned. And so, because I was part of that Kurt Weill Broadway thing, he was actually in the orchestra. And somehow that's, we started, when we worked professionally, came, in fact, another 10 years, in 2013, that's when he really started teaching me his music. I'm the only one that doesn't have the chance, so. But, so, most of that work, like he talked about Chicken Dust, he's got a song dedicated to his dad. And it really has been fascinating for me to see how he has always been honest to himself, and he's always been addressing pertinent issues. Even when he has a corporate gig, it doesn't change, So when I was actually writing about this issue of migration and Joburg in itself, I also, apart even from this work, I was thinking about Stimela, from Brazil, because he's the one that really addressed the issue of migration. And I find that at least that time, the migration was really forced physically, because people would be pushed and forced to come and get on the trains to come to Joburg. And one of my other friends, Sisonke, also has an album called Gaba the Migration, where he talks about this kind of migration, where he's forced to leave his home from Cape Town to come to Joburg. So I was thinking, perhaps every time when we talk about migration, we always think about a cross-border migration, but we haven't thought about how also traumatic it is to move from one province to the other, because everybody has to experience that little metamorphosis from you being a farm girl to being, a township person. And that metamorphosis, I call it a metamorphosis in a way. And I believe that, in fact, jazz, South African jazz, has a capacity to actually speak about the metamorphosis that the laborers, these coerced laborers, go through. And I believe when they compose, there's almost like 4 planes. Obviously, first they talk, they refer on the trauma that the workers get to experience. And then there's a whole lamentation of the fact that, even when you're gonna go back home, you are changed already. It's all gone away. And then the third framework is, the rebellion. How does one want to cope in Johannesburg? Other people, it breaks them. Other people actually become much more industrious because of it. So, it depends on the person. And those kinds of experiences are actually captured by a lot of jazz musicians, one of whom is actually Manda Mlangeni. I mean, in the musical, he talks about, there's another one called Nkululeko, which is really a cry for freedom. And I'm happy that also he's joined by a choir called Vivacious Sounds that I work with. And I think it's beautiful to hear young people scream for their own freedom, because they have, unlike the other ones in the past that knew they didn't, these ones are told that there is freedom. So there's a kind of like reverse coercion, you know, not to rebel because someone gives you something that you never actually fought for. And obviously because there's a lot of economic suppression that they experience just being in the township. Systematically messes up with your mind, with your resources and all that stuff. And them being able to participate here is also you know, an awareness that is incredible, that makes the work speaks. So I actually titled the piece South African Jazz Scream, Laborers, the Lost Dreams of Laborers, you know. And I think there is so much that I would want to say, but I think for time, I'd rather like to leave it here for everybody to think about.
Thanks, Yonela. Thanks very much. So in the context of referring to this history, I'd love to go to the speaker to my right, who is Emeritus Professor David Copeland, who at Wits needs no introduction. In many ways wrote the foundational text of South African social music and theatre history, again, the city music of South Africa. I'm really excited to have learned in preparing for today that he's working on a new book on the extraordinary history of the South African music industry. And so he's really well placed to be able to place these musics of migration and migrant musics into a discussion with the present. So David, I know you've also been a long-time supporter of Mandla and his music. I'd love to pass the microphone to you to just share any kind of context that you'd like to on these topics.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Brett, old friends here now. All of the years when I was teaching this topic of the historical and political emergence of our kind of jazz and coming out of the In Township Tonight thing, I came to the realization that it's the artists and the cultural creators who give any city its cultural character, which you had said in, what was Mandla said in his abstract. There is something about, okay, people, there are financiers and there are road builders and architects, but when it comes to it, you think of Paris, New York, Tokyo, you think of what the culture really has to offer, and not about some big buildings, maybe, okay? And this town of ours, the late John Machikisa, who was my friend, he called Johannesburg the instant city. And in a sense, that's the case. That's the case because in 1887, there was nobody here. And in 1900, in time for the second Anglo-Boer War, there were more than 120,000 people here. So it was an incredible influx of people, and the majority of those people were African people, okay? And not only from our country or our area, but from all of the countries south of the Congo. They came, recruited, they had to pay colonial tax, and they had to see what modernity was all about, and they wanted things, and there was this coercion and so on. So the city just sort of ignited, and like Kimberley before it was a honky-tonk town, which Charles van Onselen's recent books have kind of shown. It was the whole place was a honky-tonk, okay? A kind of a frontier mining camp, but with the majority being African. And so, when you weren't sort of slaving away underground, you had to have a good time. I mean, otherwise you weren't gonna survive. Everybody knows that, you know, the harder the work, the harder the play. So there were these dance halls and shebeens and places all over the place, and many people came up from the Cape, both Eastern and Western, who had some musical education. They had, you know, because they were the first to be kind of colonized, and they had been at it a few more hundred years than the rest of us, and they came up and they found that, you know, there was a place for them, and not only entertaining the new arrivals, but in teaching people also how to play. Okay, so it was a job, a pretty clean job. So then the local people, I mean the Padys of Umasekela and the guitarists coming from KwaZulu-Natal and so on, also arrived and shaped up into bands. Now the first bands tended to be what we have been called colored people. They were the ones who had the background. And the very first bands that were formed in their areas go right back to 1920s and 30s. And they taught a great many people. And the others were the school plazas, we might say, the Amakolwa, the people from those schools in the Eastern Cape, especially, who had some musical education from teachers and missionaries and so on. So much so that if you wanted to be a musician in this town in the early days, 20s and 30s, you basically had to speak Xhosa, or at least understand it. That was the language of the business at the time. And so as a result, we got this blend of all these, kind of Western innovations, harmonies, the church, military bands, and the fact that the people arriving here also wanted to hear something of their own music, something familiar. It was very alienating to be here. And, they looked around and they said, well, let's see, I guess I'll have to put my one string, away, and I'll play this beautiful trade store guitar or get a saxophone. I mean, we didn't have the sort of instruments here that readily translated to Honky Tonk Town. But Honky Tonk Town had the instruments for us, okay? And the Salvation Army bands and all those things. So we got into the American thing like really early in African terms. By meaning we, I mean the Southern Africans and so on, and developed bands. So then there was, well, it has to be local, but it also has to be worldly, because people in Johannesburg, they aspired to be worldly cultural citizens. They would see these movies with Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington and Nicholas Brothers, people in tuxedos and so on. And they said, well, we can do that. We can do that. But if you did it strictly in an appropriative way, where you in African terms, by meaning we over over the rainbow or something like that, the local people didn't respond. So new groups like the Rhythm Kings and others, they blended our own melodies, which came from all parts of the country, and some of our instrumental with the jazz organology, with the instruments that were available in the bands. And so was born our kind of jazz. And it has carried on. We have a national jazz culture, I think, and which is equal to that of the great jazz nations, not only African America, but Brazil and others that have national cultures of jazz. But then the question remains, what's the balance? What's the balance in having a world recognized, the human jazz culture, and our own special kind of jazz, which is what our people want to hear? I mean, the great jazz favorites, the evergreens and so on, people still love them. You play in Chile, the people still love it. They never get tired, because we don't throw things away in South Africa. We keep them and we transform them and make something new, which is happening even now. So I'll leave you with that question.
So lovely. David, thank you. And this idea that there are these cosmopolitan forms of jazz that point in two directions simultaneously, that they're cosmopolitan within African spheres, that they're often ways of making the traditional new. That lovely phrase of Amiri Barak is the changing same. We have our own version of that. But then are worldly at the same time. So really layered practices. So I'd love to thank you firstly, Naren, for helping Leonela move to his next gig. I'm going to move to my colleague Chantal Willie-Peterson now, who's an award-winning jazz composer, pianist, bass player, vocalist, and an educator in our school. She's also the first female president of the South African Association of Jazz Educators. I think the battery on that microphone is flat, so we'll do the communal thing of sharing the resource. Chantal, I'm going to pass to you for a response and your thoughts, please.
Sure. Thank you so much, Prof. Brett. Thank you so much to my esteemed colleagues and our warm and wonderful audience online and with us today. It's such a privilege to share, Manda. And having the opportunity to hear your work tomorrow is something that's truly reflective for me in many ways. And it's an honor to have read part of what you've shared with me and just have a very short response to that. Manda, when I consider your work, I immediately thought of a work that Duke Ellington wrote in a time and season where there was a lot of social and political and economic heaviness and unevenness within the time and place that he saw himself as a composer. And because I thought of what an oratorio is, this large-scale work with up to 30 movements, and the impact of these integrated parts that start to move together, that requires a migration in a way of the psychology of people you're working with, the musicality, the background, what it disrupts, even within the ensemble that you work with, and what it displaces, and what it almost addresses, as you said, the trauma. In a way, for me, migration also represents a spiritual displacement of all the people. And as Prof. Copeland said, Johannesburg, I did some reading around who the first inhabitants were here, and some of the stone memorials that are still left of inhabitants before the Transvaal was sort of instated or named or nationalized. And what all of this brought me to, if you don't mind sharing, was just a reflection of some of my PhD work. If I may humbly just share how your work inspires reflection for me. And one of the people that I have the honor to study, and in no way am I the authority, they have been great readers and writers on her life. It is that of Satima Benjamin, because I am a colored woman, and because my PhD is called The Women Who Raised Me, and because of my own trauma, having lost a mom who was murdered when I was 19. I looked at her life, and those also of Dulcie September and Tina Scout. And the idea of forgottenness, the idea of elusiveness, the idea that it's hard to sometimes be able to diagnose the definition of something for yourself personally, and the physiological experience one goes through to get to that terming for yourself. And so when I look at Satima's life, and though, as I've said, I'm really trying to shoulder and bring inspiration to what has been done, I'm primarily looking at her as a composer. And I'm looking at her original works, and I'm looking at her lyrical text. I'm looking at her compositions written at a time where she migrated with her husband, but she also moved from her role as a domestic mom, a wife, and all the day-to-day of that, to becoming a singer in America who wasn't really accepted as a Black South African, and even when returning home, working with men who were so-called colored at that time, had so much difficulty trying to migrate all of what she had experienced and lived into a composition, into an album, into a statement for which she wanted to really portray her becoming, give of her trauma, live of her life through musical sound. And I'm trying to look at lyrics and say, well, what are the questions that we can still ask that help us today to kind of understand how music can still yet have positive displacement and a positive uncomfortability for us and among us to advocate for so many ills that still, as with the 1976 revolt, has not necessarily been dealt with in an in-depth way. And so just in closing, I made so many notes and I have not really mentioned any of them. Whether migration was voluntary or involuntary to Johannesburg, a part of my focus that I was once again drawn. My father's a pastor, so making notes is like, it's not criminal, right? But it's just industrious for me. I think one of the reflections, Manda, was to look at how your work, when we sit in the audience tomorrow, induces us to consider once again the constraints, the changes, the challenges, the choices we have, not only as South Africa is globalized, but how South African jazz continues to globalize itself. And whether or not we think, as with Satima, the balance she, in a complex and perplexed way, the balance she tried to sort of inherently share of herself, which was being of a nation here, but also being of other nations in her song Nations Within Me, that sort of complexity of herself, that we have an opportunity again to address not only physical migration, but also the aspect of spiritual migration within South African jazz music. Thank you so much.
Chantal, among the many valuable things you said, I think these two perspectives of firstly recognizing the gendered nature of migration in relation to Johannesburg is really pertinent. how forms of female agency shaped this musical culture in very interesting ways. So even like the figure of the Shebeen Queen as sort of the patron of the site in which these musical practices that David was describing emerged in the city is fascinating. And thanks also for then, adding the perspective of the exile and that dimension of migration and how it's fed into these musical practices too. So I'd love now to introduce Nirin Tulsi, who many of us know and read as a really senior and award-winning South African journalist who works in the art space, but also in broader, covers a wide range. And again, I think the thematics we're addressing speak to those. And I was excited to read that you're working on a documentary in relation to this. So Nirin, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. And I'll pass the mic to you.
Thanks. I think a couple of thoughts that just came from what Manda was saying, but perhaps to start, I've been intrigued by John Matshikisa's essay called Johannesburg, the Instant City. His premise is that Rome was not built in a day, but Johannesburg was. And if you're reading it, you have so many descriptions of Johannesburg as the African mecca of the deal. Johannesburg, the ugly, hectic Johannesburg that draws energies that makes the rest of the country tick. Johannesburg is an ever-changing movie that no one has ever quite managed to produce. It is a screenplay in progress. Like movie directors, leaders are thrown up out of the soil in the surrounding area to try to make sense of order, to try and make a sense of order of what Johannesburg is. And there's certainly that sense of, a city that nourishes you as much as it eats your soul at the same time. It's an interesting paradox to work in, but to live in. And certainly, like Manda's music captures that in a very profound way. While it also deals with, I think, the complexities of our failing revolution. Youthful provocations to an older guard, which has become almost flaccid in its political thinking. And I'd also like to maybe just touch on what Yonela said. I think there's certainly this idea of intergenerational trauma in our music because, and that comes from that, migration is a product of, urban migration to the city is a product of enclosure, of land dispossession in the rural spaces. It's about the reification of the black body into a unit of labor to do nothing more than to produce. And there's an interesting relationship between the metropolis and capitalism, I suppose, which then produces, or we respond to. Certainly. But I want to actually maybe bring it back a little bit to, Machikis also talks about Johannesburg being the humming terminus of a two-way street between South Africa and the rest of the world, and the rest of the African continent. And that for me is very urgent right now, because we're a city where there's in politics and music, which has evolved because of the migrants. Clemens Kadali, Yusuf Dadu, who, him and various other people came from this very small village in Gujarat, and they were instrumental in the non-racial movement in the 1940s and 50s, which kind of infused into the anti-apartheid struggle. Going back even earlier, people like Valyama, the 14-year-old martyr, who goes off in the early 1900s to incite the miners in KwaZulu-Natal to rise up. To protest against these various taxes. So there's a dynamicism and an energy here, which I think finds itself distills itself in Manda's work, and in a very personal way, but also in a much larger sense as well. But coming back to the initial idea, of a migrant city, of people coming from outside our borders as well. Certainly, and I think we have to ask the question, what now? Because, when was it? What now in a city that wants to describe itself within the terms of Africanacity, right? So I live in a block in downtown Johannesburg, which has Kag Street running through it, which is a set of informal stalls where you have Congolese people, Ethiopians, Eritreans, Zimbabweans all selling their wares. And a few months ago, there was a march down the very center of Kag Street, piercing this Africanicity.
And it was men and women in freshly bought camouflage pants, in freshly printed T-shirts, which said Operation Badula. They moved it with a choreography which suggested that they had time to work out what they wanted to say and how they wanted to say it, which suggests money, which then demands of us, and this march was a provocation. It was intimidation, and was happening in a city which is born out of migrancy, and we have to ask ourselves. I mean, I think that's something that Mandla responds in some way in his work, but it behoves all of us to ask ourselves what is to be done. So I think I'll leave that there.
Niren, thank you. And so this question of this extraordinary amnesia between this foundational experience of the city of migrancy, and particularly intra-African migrancy, and then somehow in the post-apartheid period, failure to recognize in public sphere kind of interactions. I think you use the word urgency, and I think it fuels the composition, and I'm grateful to Mandla for again thematizing this. So the final speaker on our panel who hasn't yet spoken before we open up for general conversation is Phumelele Mzimela, who is a vocalist and M's composition student in our school. Phumi, thank you so much for joining us, and you've of course have a relationship to Mandla and his work as well. So I'm going to pass the microphone to you. I know you weren't able to be with us at the very beginning. Thanks for finding the venue. Lovely to hear from you, and thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, and Mandla, I look forward to seeing your work tomorrow. But just looking at, first of all, what you sent me in terms of a summary, and having heard the other speakers speak, migrancy in my particular area of research is, well, I'm studying jazz vocals and I'm studying women. So I study both women migrancies that are voluntary and forced as well. Because people, I mean, particularly just myself, I'm an immigrant of sorts. I'm from Durban. I didn't come to Joburg because it was fun. I came because it was the only way. And that seems to be a generational thing, whereas you need to move from a kind of a more rural setting. I'm not saying I'm from the rural areas, I'm not. But the only way to sort of engage in the economy of South Africa seems to be to move from somewhere rural and less developed to the very overcrowded and culture shock cosmopolitan cities of your Durban, Johannesburg, and Cape Town. And I think Johannesburg is the most extreme in terms of cosmopolitanism and just being a hodgepodge mix match of a lot of people who come from different areas to do different things. And I not worry, but it is a thought of mine as to where all of this is leading, because where life is getting harder, right? The rand is dropping, etc., etc. And migrancy, in terms of migrant labor, is something that inherently disenfranchises. You pulled away from your family, you pulled away from your friends to come and work in the big cities of Johannesburg, instead of thinking about developing these smaller areas of South Africa. We are all kind of crowded in one place. And I wonder, in my own research, if South African people are able to kind of be pushed all together, or does that inherently cause tensions in between a lot of different underlying things? Tensions of race, tensions of culture, tensions of tribalism, things that we're seeing boil over a lot, xenophobia, boil over a lot in Johannesburg. And it's a little bit of a scary thing. But going back to my own research, I am looking at the jazz vocalists of the 1950s, which in itself starts with migration. For example, the Dorothy Masugas of the world, who's a huge part of my own research, she migrates from Zimbabwe to come to South Africa. That in itself is saying that the only way in which you can engage in being a singer or coming to the stage, being some sort of, presence in the jazz world, is to come to the jazz center, which happened to be at the time Johannesburg and some of Cape Town. So Masuga comes here, she writes Nonzokolo, which is a composition centered around migrancy. And so it is, it's striking to me that we're still telling the same story. decades and decades and decades later, and it's still very, very relevant because it's kind of the same system. And the question is that what we really want? I don't think we have a choice in the matter, but is there not another way? It's something that was in my head just reading and thinking about the migrancy to Johannesburg. Also, the fact that Johannesburg was an instant city, but it also seems to not really be expanding. There is a center of Johannesburg, and it's remained the center for the longest time, and people pack into the center instead of trying to expand the outskirts of Johannesburg and make them as valuable as, for example, a CBD. And does that in itself not cause a whole lot of tension? Going back to women migrants, especially, who are the people that I am studying, there's two things. One, the gendered nature of migrancy, which in itself sort of removes agency from these particular women, especially if it is a forced migration, to go and work in, say, for example, some of the women I'm studying came to Johannesburg and ended up working as domestic workers, the Miriam Makebas of the world. And what does that do to one's agency? And then having to, at night, go to the shebeen and have the courage to stand up on the bandstand. In and of itself, the bandstand is... I need to find the words. In and of itself, the bandstand is a hard place to be if you are a woman and not trying to sing. So luckily for me, I am a singer. Luckily for the women I am studying, they're singers too. But if they are not singers, what does that migrancy kind of do to them? Because a lot of the times, somebody picked up a saxophone in the outskirts of South Africa, migrated to Johannesburg, and then had to contend with all of that and essentially fly to where other mediocre men could walk to. And it is a thought I'm constantly having, that the same sort of migrancy affects us in very, very different ways, and our positionality as people shape the experience we have with the same sort of journey. We can come from the same place, but class, race, money will shape our experiences of coming to Johannesburg very, 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 very differently. And also how then the tensions of Johannesburg deal with us as people will be shaped because of those factors. For example, if you live in a Sandton or a Fourways, you don't experience the same kind of pulse tension that you might experience living in Fox Street, for example. So it's a whole different story to be told coming to the same place if you have a different positionality in life. And I think I find that interesting when it comes to talking, especially about youth migration to Johannesburg. Okay.
Thank you so much, Pumi. So I'd love to open it up now for any questions or comments from the floor before I hand back to Mandla to introduce the clip that we'll be playing from his oratorio. Any questions or comments? Kumar.
First of all, thank you so much to the wonderful contribution and exciting topic around migration. I like the idea that Manda started with, which is when we think of migration, of course we think in the first instance of the physicality associated with that. And then the second theme around this was what then happens to the migrated collective that find themselves in one space and creating sort of new sounds. And that led me to actually think now in a little bit more perhaps technical way, in terms of like if we think of it as a spiritual space, what does it do to the artistry of creating the music? So in other words, for example, how does that sort of integrated sense of migration in sound influence the construction of the new sounds that define the contemporary of the migrated. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I pass the microphone to anyone else? Wanda, what if you'd like to come and join us here then? I mean, we can... I mean, do you want to pick up this theme of spirituality in relation to the piece? And then you can maybe introduce the track.
The funny thing, actually, now that I think about it, I've got 3 generations of families that have lived here for more than close to actually mining town, and people from Gazeland used to migrate there. But I consider myself a Joburger, and born and bred here. And the only time I really migrated was to actually study when I went to Cape Town and pursued a music degree, and I ended up staying there for 8 years. And I had to actually found I couldn't break it in Joburg. I couldn't. It was too cutthroat. I had to hone my skill in Cape Town and play at the jazz clubs and play all the standards. Autumn Leaves. There'll Never Be Another You. Green Dolphin Street. Rhythm Changes. You name it. You had to know standards. And had to adapt to that world and create in that world and bring music from that world. I actually started my first band and my first encounter also with community music was actually in Cape Town, and also understanding also the root of their histories as well, the complex histories that also existed in Cape Town, and they search for also meaning, identity, and questions that I before have never asked myself, because I thought the fact of identity was already a given in terms of, yeah, I mean, aren't we all black? Aren't we all searching for freedom? Don't we all align with liberation and sing? And it was so nuanced in Cape Town that it took some navigating. In how I created the music and how I spoke to also, and at that time when I was staying in Cape Town, particularly then, was when the culture was not geared to actually performing original music, and the people who actually broke through was one of my classmates by the name of Carl Shepard, who had actually released his first album, I think, in 2009. And had to actually drop out of varsity because he rebelled against that system, in that it was it was an imitation of what America is, and he had to find his own voice. And that was a rallying call for a lot of us as well to actually dig deep within our own wells of consciousness and of self-expression, of not just trying to be the next Miles Davis or next Clifford Brown, but how we tell the stories of our people. So, and through that, I mean, other voices emerged, such as Yobukani Daya community, I'm speaking of in Cape Town. And then so programming your music within that space, which demanded you to play those covers, it was a cover city, was a challenge. And nobody would actually book you if you played your own original music. We had to fight for that. And we had to create that space. And I remember the only person who gave me a chance was a guy that I used to drink with in a place called Tagores. And he started out as a kitchen. And that's where I first programmed my music, in this place where they had like vinyls, countless vinyls of Indian classical music. They had Schubert sonatas and Tchaikovsky. And then there was this strange Jamaican guy who was the bartender. And that, in a way, also became the epicenter of the Cape Town music scene. That small place where you could hardly fit in 10 people. and that's where a large wave of consciousness actually developed around us mobilizing and writing our music. And that's where we actually gained acceptance in that space that actually didn't want to accept us. And actually coming back to Joburg and actually saying that, okay, this is who I am and this is what I'm going to do, and speaking from a position of being, this is where I was born and this is my experience of a Joburger, but my formation of actually understanding that I am also Joburg was through that displacement, that spiritual displacement, just like much of the jazz movement in the 60s of the exiles, such as your Blue Notes of the day, who, if you listen to the records that they made prior to them leaving South Africa, were in the vein of American jazz. They used to play, I Cover the Waterfront. They used to play so many of the jazz standards. They even won the Castle Like a Big Band competition in 1960, was it 62, 63, 64? And when they went to Switzerland, and they also stayed with Abdullah Ibrahim, that's when they discovered their sound, and that's how they could also, and because they were not at home, they could explore the sounds of home, and they could remind themselves of who they are because of the very idea of being displaced. Wow. And I think that displacement, in a way, brings you closer to who you want to be or who you are.
So might that be a key to listening to Joburg?
Yes, and because everybody that lives in Joburg is not from Joburg, is not originally a Joburger, and that's how, in its way, that's how Joburg is able to define itself in the way it is, and it's how it also creates its own identity. And you look at neighborhoods, you look at the lingo that actually evolves from Joburg, where simple things like a thing like igedlela, which means kettle, takes on a different meaning. Gedlela, you know, is a kettle, but gedlela, I don't know if you know what a gedlela is actually. Is a car, you know, and if we want to ingwenya, you know, it's not necessarily because he's a crocodile, but he's a person who actually knows how to navigate the streets, you know, and because of simple things and things that you might even, words or colloquialism that you might even take for granted, take on a different meaning. And if you're not there to witness it or to be part of it, you just miss out. So me not staying in the township and coming there will miss out on a whole conversation within a sentence.
Can you tell us quickly what you're going to play for us?
Oh yes, yeah. So this one is in Nkululeko, which was actually written by myself and Yonela Nana. This was back in 2016 when we actually were commissioned by the Artscape Mandla Mbote to actually write the piece. And initially it didn't actually have any lyrics, but it was just also a play on Kwaitoisms. And that melody is a repetitive melody, and that we displace, and also and it's on a model theme. It's on an F minor. But we also even just play within that F minor. We change the qualities of the chord by making it a sus chord and almost carrying an ambivalent quality, and then resounding to a resolution.
And then just quickly, so we're getting a sort of preview to how the piece sounded 7 years ago.
Yes.
The version we'll hear tomorrow.
Oh, and the version that you're actually going to see and hear now is what is going to be performed tomorrow, together with the sand art. And we got the sand artist actually who's from Zimbabwe, Tawanda Mu Africa, whom I met at the African Freedom Station a couple of years ago when I worked on a production together with Steve Mokwena entitled Song of Nongoma.
Wonderful.
Yes.
So thank you. If we can ask our technical team please to play the clip. We may like to sit there so that we can see it. And it's appropriate we end with music.
Swing
So colleagues, let's please feel welcome to take up Dr. Khumalo's invitation to extend the conversation to the Seabrook Hall. And of course, be very welcome to come to the performance tomorrow at the Great Hall. Thanks to everyone for being part of the Africa Day program. And thanks for coming.
Yes, yes, no, thank you, Prof. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. Bye, Doc. We'll see you on Monday. Thank you for the opportunity, Doc.
I'm sick.
Okay. Yeah.
You coming tomorrow?
What time is it?
It's at 7. I guess this is what I will.
7.
Yeah. 7. Roofed a little bit. Oh, yeah. Back there.
Wow.
So great. So profit. Thanks. Yeah. It's so nice to see you. Having had to do without each other over online.
How are you?
I'm sick. Oh, yeah. Okay. And you can take it. Good. Nice to be both.
You could just